Two. Hey, how are you, Tim?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
I tell you, I've had one of those busy mornings. Just
Yeah.
for
Are you still there?
I am still here. Yes.
Okay, I'm getting a lag from you today. I wonder. Let me try something here. I don't know whether it's you or me, but let me turn on my network testing. Always ready for these type of things, aren't we? Are you still
Notice that you're.
there?
I.
There we go. Now you're stable.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I didn't know what was going on there, but I guess we're fine for right now.
we are.
Okay, so we've been talking the last 2 weeks about Agile and how Agile works and the functions of Agile. And I was thinking, how about if you and I went through how Agile works in the way that a project rolls out? How does that sound?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, in my old way of thinking, my predictive manner, that would have involved things like initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, closing, that sort of thing, controlling,
Yeah,
monitoring.
I'm thinking about this. And this is the way one of my mentors actually rolled it out to me and a few other project managers. He pulled us on some development of new services in consulting. And he said, you know what? Let's try this stuff and see how it works. And he said, we're not going to really look at anything discrete. And this work is going to be a little bit different. And let's build a story around this stuff instead of just trying to create a bunch of requirements and create a bunch of specifications and lock ourselves into a plan. We don't have a time frame, but let's see if we can actually do this in a reasonable amount of time. And lo
So
and
he's
behold,
saying
huh?
he's saying start with a blank sheet, no requirements up front, no project charter. Is that what he was saying?
Yeah, he said
Okay.
exactly that. And what was weird was we didn't even have a charter per se. What we had was we need to get this service up and running in 6 months. We don't know what it looks like. We know it has to do something with data centers, but we don't know what it looks like. So we were supposed to figure out how to get together and interact with about 20 different clients, find out what worked with them, and then bring it back to create a service. Lo and
So
behold, it worked.
so without really stating it, he in fact did have a sort of an initiation phase.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
In Agile, you may not have a chartering document per se or a charter. Do you remember in the old days when we were in PMBOK 5 and we had a project statement of work? It used to be called a narrative description.
Yeah, I lived and died by those. That's what we ended up doing a lot of our bids towards so that we could, win some business and keep ourselves employed. But yeah, those statements of work were absolutely incredibly important to us when we did.
Did you ever do a statement of work that was just in an email that said, this is what we need to do? I think this is the direction we need to go. This is what we're looking at. And I want you to start exploring this work. Did you ever get an email like that?
Only once I was on the project and we were going along very well, doing basically what the customer had asked us. And then another piece of legislation or something hit us and they said, okay, while you're doing the mainstream work, take a look at this piece as well. And often those would come in an email, yes, but
Okay,
still it was a branch off of our main work.
Right. That branch was a project overview statement.
Yeah.
It's like we need to invest in a $30 million project. We often would spend up to $20,000 trying to win that. And a project overview statement says, here's an opportunity to actually put your head around what you're going to get for that $20,000 to $60,000 of trying to get client approval.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's how we really started our projects. Sometimes this money was even funded by sales. It wasn't funny money. It wasn't indirect cost. It was actually a cost that was spent by sales that said, can you start exploring this, guys? And we want to see the results of your exploration.
So that was kind of your introduction into how you began the Agile process for this? Is that
exactly? And that's how I started learning Agile. Now, think about this. By doing this, we were able to not just duplicate services that we'd done before, but we kept the structure of the project such that we could actually engage with clients directly and quickly. So we could figure out what they needed, not what we wanted to build for them. And that was the justification my friend had for doing this type of work.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you think of some of the projects that we did, some of the multi-year, multi-phased projects, you often didn't get the customer at the knowledge level or the subject matter expert level involved until you're well into requirements definition. Typically not at the front, right? I mean, that's so exactly. I can see what you did where that made a lot of sense to what you're doing.
And on top of that, we were able to build a relationship with the client along the way, not just the project manager, but the team. The engineers and the subject experts were able to introduce themselves, interact, and it created a cohesive team between both the project team and the stakeholders themselves. So we figured out we had something special until we learned about Agile and learned it wasn't so special.
So now you've started this process. So how does I imagine the next step would be planning, and now you've got your subject matter experts alongside. Is that what you ended up doing, starting the planning process at that point?
Yeah, we did. And let's actually look at this, okay? Let's take a pretend project here, and we'll play with that all the way through. So let's pretend that we have a swimsuit market portal. Some company wants to sell their swimsuits online, right? And they're asking us to build it. Now, we can go to it and say, oh, I've done that project before. Here, let me just build this for you. And they're happy and they go on their way. They get a cookie cutter solution that we do on a regular basis. We're successful. They're pretty satisfied. We can move on. Now, what if we want to approach this as if we've never approached this problem? How do we do this?
And I imagine you want to get the users involved right away to give you their thoughts around what this should look like.
Exactly. So we have three different things that we're asking them for. Number one, why? Yeah. We always start off, what are you opening up a new line of business? Are you hitting a new market? What's the purpose? Because if you're hitting a new market, do you want to go just on the internet through a laptop? Do you want tablets and smartphones and all those things, right? But we don't want to get there yet. Here's what we want to look at. We want to actually get needs and objectives. We're going to figure out some use cases. And those are the processes that everybody thinks that they're going through, right? They're going to go in, they're going to hit a user interface, they're going to use some business intelligence, and they're going to hit a database, and they're going to pull up information. They can do some searches, and they can do some purchases where the purchase processing is in the business interface too, and we're all doing well. But that's the process. So we have basically the owners of the swimsuit store who can go in and update the inventory. And we have the customers who can go in and review the inventory and purchase, right? So we have some good use cases here. And we can almost build a project around that, couldn't we?
We could. I'm just smiling because I remember when use cases were introduced to me to some of my projects early on. This was, I think it was a fairly new development. And I thought, why are we drawing all these silly stick figures? That's, if you remember the old days, the old use cases, is that what we're doing here? We're building stick figures, or are we?
Actually, yeah. And
Okay.
you can do them in two ways. You can build these stick figures for what we have today. So you can talk about what the gaps are and what you need fixed. Or you can build these stick figures, what you want. And
I want to do it. I want to do it for what I want.
Right, right. That's exactly right. Now, we also collect user stories. Okay, so let's say that you're working with a owner of the store, and they're saying, nope, I want them in that application and out 7 minutes. I want them purchasing within 7 minutes, so it has to be quick. And I don't want yellow, I want pink on the arrow. And I don't want green, I want blue. And you're thinking, well, yeah, we can do that, but is that going to sell? Is that going to work? And in the old days, in predictive projects, it was like, how do I tell this stakeholder that yellow and pink and blue are not going to go well? And how do I tell them that this 7 seconds is going to be defined primarily by the internet and by the functionality and by the limitations that the users have hitting the web? So getting them away from engineering the application was a requirement in predictive, and we always had trouble. What was your experience with this?
Well, a lot of times what we would do in a situation, for example, like the user interface you were talking about, where I want this color versus that color, knowing what we knew about what worked on internet projects, on internet interfaces, user interface, what we would typically do is we would mock up some ideas and show the crispness of one color set versus something that they were looking at. And so then we would coach them along so that they would end up selecting something that worked for them. But we did a lot of the work after we understood more about what their functional requirement was before we even got into the user interface design. But yeah, a lot of times we would mock it up for them and have them then select what they're looking for.
Okay, Agile does this really in a weird way. Agile says, let's not design this thing right this second. What I need to do is figure out what the customer needs and what the customer's objective is. Why are they going in here and what do they need? I need to get to a swimsuit so I can buy it. I don't want 5 clicks. I want to get in there, purchase my swimsuit and get out. And for the store owner, I want to make sure my inventory is fresh. And I want to make sure that the inventory is always available for my customers so that I don't miss a sale. What we're doing is starting to get out of the space of requirements and into the space of objectives, which is why they need this, as well as the needs. And you're building not necessarily an application, not necessarily a wireframe, but you're building a framework of needs and expectations, and that's what we call it.
So in that example you just gave, I imagine a user story would be the one from the purchaser's perspective. Another user story might be inventory replenishment. Another user story might be, how do I pay for this thing? Is that what we're getting at now? Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. And again, as a purchaser of swimsuits, I want to go on here and get validation of my purchase that can be sent to me in an email. That's a need. That's an
Yeah.
objective. So we can build this with that in mind. Now, here's the beautiful thing. What we're going to be doing is using those wireframes in a little while, okay? And we're going to be able to show those wireframes as a prototype so we can get feedback constantly, but we don't have requirements yet. So let's step back, okay? How is this different from what you did? Were you focused primarily on requirements when you were working with these?
Yeah, we
Okay,
would
yeah.
we would always start with once we understood the kind of the larger scope. It was less about those user stories that we just talked about and more about defining the requirements kind of within functional areas. So in some ways, I think we imagined the user stories in our minds while we built out these requirements. And then we would validate them with the subject matter experts. And they would at that point correct our misunderstandings or add to what we didn't quite grasp. But there was some of that during requirements workshop. There was some of that definition and refinement of what they needed.
Okay.
So I don't think unlike the Agile process, except that we would we would extend it for the life of the entire project. Whereas what I'm hearing is that we can take this piece by piece and work on it piece by piece.
We're going to get there in just a second. One last concept that we're doing in planning.
Yeah.
Now, this works well. Agile works well in this planning model if you know what the roles and responsibilities are for both sides of the design. It's the users need to know how to express their needs and expectations. And the team, project team, the experts, need to know how to design things in such a way that they can actually give what is needed. And the design of the component is in the hands of the team, where the expression of needs is in the hands of the customer. Okay, so this is really crisply understood, and we're going to need this because when we move into execution, their needs and expectations are going to change, as we all know.
Yes.
Now, in your world, Agile may not work so well in planning and in execution. We'll see in a minute. There's something called enterprise environmental factors. There are things that cannot be moved, right? Your government requirements, your federal regulations, all of these things. These are going to be hard, firm facts. And whether you're in Agile or predictive, these are unmovable.
So if I'm buying a swimsuit, I know I have to pay tax on that swimsuit, regardless of where I am. I can't get away from that at all.
Exactly. And the project must incorporate that in.
Yeah.
It has no choice. So that's one component. The other component is we're still stuck with our internal project constraints. We're going to be estimating, but we're not going to be estimating precisely like we do in federal and government. We're going to have an agreement with our customers that we're going to use a rough order of magnitude, and we're going to refine it as we work together, and we're going to have to work closely together. And this is one of the things that we have to get used to in Agile. The customer, the sponsor, the stakeholders and the project manager, everybody has to work well together.
So this, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, this may be one of the major departures from my world of the old predictive modeling. Because, for example, a lot of times we were given a date certain whereby we would have to implement. And so therefore we would be able to estimate the amount of work that could be done or must be done based on team size, or bring in a team sized large enough to make that happen by date certain. But in Agile, the way you're describing this, if I don't yet know everything, that means can I still try to figure out to meet date certain?
within a rough order of magnitude, you know, is it bigger than a bread box and smaller than a truck? But we can actually get a little closer to that pretty quickly. There's another thing that's going to hurt us in Agile planning. So when we're actually starting to put this work together and we look at these needs and expectations, we're going to have summary tasks, much like a work package, right? We're going to have groups of work. We're going to have the user interface group of work. We're going to have the database group of work. We're going to have the business intelligence piece of work. And this may or may not function very well on its own. If we can actually create standalone pieces for these things and create a way that we can actually demonstrate them, we can do it well. But it has to be not based on the technical specifications. You can't have a database that your customers play with. You know, you have to have these features built in such a way that it's relevant to the customers. This is not an engineering effort. Putting together a good Agile plan is more putting together a plan that you can describe in natural language and build it piecemeal out of what we call product backlog items. The backlog is the total amount of work, just like your total scope. And the product backlog items are the individual items that you can agree with your customers that you want to design around. For instance, you can have a feature that says we need to get to any item in the database through the user interface within 3 clicks. You know, that's a 3-click feature. We can also have a feature that says, let's have a comparison intelligence here too, right? And so what we're doing is we're creating these little isolated packages that we can go off and work on, okay? And those are what we call our summary tasks.
And so again, back to because this is kind of hanging with me, coming from predictive. So if I'm going to meet a date certain, but if Agile doesn't have quite that ability, but you're putting together all these packages and you've got this work backlog, I think what I'm also hearing is that if the customer needs it by this date, then I can prioritize what needs to be there so that if every single piece of functionality can't make it by that date, at least the most important ones do.
That's the key.
Uh-huh.
That's the key. Prioritization of the backlog is a really big item. Okay, it's a critical component. It's like being able to deliver a bare bones smartphone right now and then be able to incrementally add to it. And the terminology in this talks about delivering functionality early and often, and also talks about delivering value early and often.
Well, and that makes, now it's starting to kind of click for me, because what that means, okay, I'm going to put myself in a user story. I'm going to use that form as the customer coming into this store. I'm going to buy a bathing suit. And I'm going to say, I want it in red and I want it large. And that's about all the functionality I have. And I can click, buy it, and have it delivered. So that gets me to the process of having someone be able to come in, pick out the merchandise, buy it, and get it delivered. But it doesn't take care of a situation that I might be able to handle in a later sprint or a later feature. And that is, how do I truly know that your large is the same as my large, the one that fits me? So maybe there's some functionality I add later on that says, okay, this is how you would measure whether you're a medium or a large or an extra large. And here's the measurement process so that I have fewer returns because of improper sizing.
Right. And also, we can have it from the user story of the store owner too, who says, you know what, it would be really interesting to show them what other purchasers who looked at this type of a swimming suit looked at, sort of like we do on Amazon. Other browsers have looked at these type of books who bought this type of book, right? To actually procure more and more businesses. So you have a way to not just deliver a little value right now, but you can continue to deliver further.
And in the example you just did, where if you purchase this bathing suit, you could also purchase this tank top. That could be a feature that you add later on after implementation to continue to bolster your ability to pay more, or ability to sell more to your customers.
Exactly. And that drives revenue and that also drives satisfaction.
Yeah,
And
typically in predictive, we wouldn't have done that. We'd have bundled all of that together, how to do sizing, how to do extra purchasing, and then build it all at once and deliver it all at once. So I can see, and then it becomes a longer time frame to be able to deliver that. So I can see the benefits of this very much.
Now, here's the secret. If somebody knows exactly what they want, okay? If they know exactly what they want, and if the person who's building what they want knows exactly how to build it, they're going to use predictive. Because the plan can create a high probability of success. We're not throwing away predictive. What we're saying is this agile methodology is really good when we have a lot of unknowns and things are really uncertain.
And this is a great example because a mom and pop shop with little exposure to internet processing may have to be led along the way. And so the Agile makes a lot of sense to be able to lead them and their customer representatives or whoever they have within their company to be able to see what we're doing and to move along with that. So this does make a lot of sense.
Okay. Now, you talked a couple times about schedule and duration estimates and cost estimates and needing to nail them tightly. How do you estimate unknown work? And even for experts, this is hard. Let's go back into the planning part of Agile, okay? And we're going to look at those not as durations, not as pieces of time. We're going to look at those pieces of work, those summary tasks. We're going to look at how difficult they are and how simple they are, right? How known and unknown they are, and how complex and uncomplex they are. And we're going to create a unit called a user story. A story point.
Okay.
And that story point is going to be a unit of, you could call it density, or you can call it, effort. As long as you don't talk about time. It's basically the difference between walking through water and walking through mud in a project. And I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I grew up in the farm.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're walking through water, that may be 1 to 3 story points of work. But if you're walking through mud, that may be 5 to 8 story points. You don't know how long it's going to take, but you know it's going to take more effort. Now, as you walk through more mud and water, you get a refined understanding of those story points that you created. And all of a sudden, you can actually get a really refined estimate of the duration of a story point within that project. And each project has its own unit of time associated to its story point.
So I'm liking this. So the example that we were using, if I want to order small, medium, or large, that's a very simple story point. But if I want to provide the customer with the ability to match his or her body type to the manufacturer's sizing model, and therefore put in a little bit of intelligence into that process over the internet, that becomes much more complex.
Right. And even though if even if we don't know how we can do it, we know one is simple and one is easy, and that's what we're going to look at. Now,
Yeah.
we're going to associate a certain number of story points to each one of these. We're also going to time box them. We are going to lock each one of these summary tasks, these features, with a start and an end. We don't know that it's going to be right. Again, it's going to be a rough order of magnitude, right? And we may use a 2 to 4 week time box, and we call sprints 2 to 4 week time boxes. It could be 3 to 5 days. It could be a month. We have a choice of that, but it's an initial estimate. Number one, it gives you a baseline for variance analysis. Number two, it gives you a sense of urgency that says we are using time in a very knowledgeable manner. We're not going to waste our time.
So this is good. Now we're getting into the actual execution of this process. So now let's kind of keep this thing going. So I'm the store owner. You're my project manager, my IT vendor. And you're telling me that we're going to do one of these user stories or story points in a 2 to 4 week time frame, and you're going to tell me what we can get done, and I'm going to say, but I can't lend you my subject matter experts for that many hours of every day. I need them also working the store. How do we handle something like that?
So we have what's called reviews. We work with them on a regular basis, and regular is defined by an agreement between the team and the stakeholders. Second of all, we're not going to use that as the only way we get information. We're also going to have a pre-work meeting on a regular basis called a stand-up, and some people call that a scrum. We're going to have a retrospective when we're nearing the end or when we're ending one of these cycles of the summary task. And during that summary task, we're going to be building a prototype. Now, we're going to build a prototype such that we can actually demonstrate it with the stakeholders when they're ready. And in your case, we can actually change our communications and change the interaction as they need. But we're also setting expectations. We will have that prototype done by Thursday, but if you can't come to us until next Tuesday, we'll work on that. And this is what it's going to do to our schedule.
So that's the beautiful part of this, is you're beginning that collaboration immediately. And so then you understand the give and take. You as the IT vendor who wants to get this thing moving, because that's how we are. We're very assertive people. We want to get stuff done. At the same time, the customer who also wants to get things done also has their day job. So there is that collaboration required where we may have to move things around a little bit to accommodate them as well as accommodate our work schedule.
Right. And everything is driven by negotiation and consensus. Yeah. In fact, the team charter is not just for the team. It's the setting expectations of the relationships of the team, the stakeholders, the sponsor, everyone involved. And this is the beautiful thing about a project manager. If I can get my team to doing some of this estimation and negotiation with the stakeholders, and I just stay involved and make sure there are no bumps on the road, I can have a better opportunity to be working with the sponsor, the store owner themselves, and saying, yeah, you wanted to launch this in July. It looks like your need to work in the store is impacting. Can you brainstorm with me a way that we can actually have these prototypes reviewed on a more regular basis?
This is not unlike my experience in the more waterfall areas, because we had situations where the most critical subject matter experts to our project, to keeping us on schedule, often were the brightest and the best who kept operations going on a daily basis, an hourly basis. And so sometimes we had to, as you mentioned, negotiate with the stakeholder, the prime stakeholder, to either backfill or something. So sometimes it would cost them a little extra in order to give us that subject matter expert for a longer period of time. They might have to backfill or approve overtime or those sorts of things. But there was always that sort of negotiation. It's just that it seems like in Agile, the negotiations are much more protracted because you have to move things along in those sprints.
Right. Now, there is one major risk when you're in planning, and it impacts execution too. If these features have a lot of dependencies between each other, you're not going to be able to prioritize so much.
Yeah.
And you may have to do things that don't develop prototypes per se, but are needed to support other functions. And when you have a lot of dependencies between the work packages, you may be better off going in a predictive manner.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so in our case, it doesn't do any good to allow a customer to order if you don't have the back office working to be able to fulfill that order.
Right, right. And so you want to prioritize a basic infrastructure where they can see the whole process from the beginning to end. We're getting back to number one, the prioritization, and number two, delivering the basic functionality and value early so that actually we can build the refined components in as we go.
So during the day, I mean, we talked a little bit about these scrums and about, I think you call them retrospectives, but during the actual process of development, let's say we choose a 2-week scrum. In that 2 weeks, I know I've got my 15-20 minute stand up every morning or sometime during the day. I know that at certain points I will do some review processes, but what kind of happens on a daily basis or an hourly basis as my team works with the customer's team?
Are you asking what the project manager's doing?
I think just the team itself with the technical folks with working with the subject matter experts. Yes, the project manager working with his or her counterpart on the customer side. Just what does it look like? What does a sprint look like?
So the team's doing the work and they're reaching out to their peers and they're reaching out to the people who provided them input. At the same time, they're working among themselves and they're trying to crack some of the issues they have from an implementation standpoint. And as a project manager, I've created some performance indicators that allow me to check three major things. And this is the same thing that you do in any project, right? Number one, how's the progress? Is the work moving forward? Is the work moving forward faster or slower? We're doing some monitoring, controlling here, right? Mm-hmm. Number two, how's the health of the team? Because it's the team that does the work. It's not the individuals. If I have a bunch of superstars, I'm in trouble. Yeah. I want to make sure that the team is healthy. You know, we're looking at not just Tuckman's ladder. We're looking at, you know, who's participating in communication, who's sending out emails, who's responsive, who's engaged, who's disengaged. I'm looking at my remote people and make sure that they're not, I'm not looking over their shoulders per se, but I am looking and making sure that they're not slowing down the work. And that's the other thing. I have some metrics out there that make sure I'm tracking the behavior of the individuals. So that's three things I'm looking at: work progress, cohesion of the team, and the behaviors of the individuals that may improve or get in the way of the project. Now, this together is good for making sure that me as a project manager, I keep things going forward and I make sure, and that way I can actually say, you know what, team, if you can actually focus on monitoring your work and making sure your work is good, I'm not an expert there. You keep me involved. I'll help you get over the obstacles because I'm good at brainstorming and I'm good at problem solving, but primarily you're the expert. And I want to support you and make it easy for you to show your expertise on the project. And so that's the relationship between the project manager and the team. They're delegating a lot of what we would do in predictive down to the team.
And I imagine they're doing the management by walking around process very well in order to continually monitor the health of the team and how they're interacting.
Right. And that also frees up the project manager to walk around the hallways and catch people in the elevator and catch people in the cafeteria, where we can actually use a more executive approach with the stakeholders, where we're talking about the vision and the objective, and we make sure that everybody has that sense of urgency and has that sense of knowledge, and they have trust in the team. And in early implementations of Agile, if your organization has not implemented Agile, the project manager is going to be spending a lot of time clarifying doubt around this Agile thing that nobody understands.
I can see that, but I'm thinking, because you mentioned prototyping earlier, the thing that strikes me, even from my time as a waterfall project manager, anytime I could get something visual in front of my customer, and the earlier I could get it in front of that customer, the better my results would be, the better my refinement of the requirements or the needs would be, the better I could start to standardize what the customer is liking. And so this whole prototyping that you talked about in Agile, it just seems to make a lot of sense that the development team is getting immediate feedback from those customer representatives and subject matter experts as to what makes sense for them, whether or not the requirements are being met correctly, whether or not they're getting off the path, or if they're right on. So that seems to make a lot of sense, that the more prototyping and the more interaction and feedback you can do during those sprints, the better your results will be, and the quicker you'll be able to develop something that's implementable sooner.
Yeah, and what the beautiful thing is, people learn better from a prototype than they use from a person giving them an explanation.
Yeah.
You put something in the hands of somebody and they say, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
That's what you were talking about.
Well, and even in the old requirements gathering workshops that we used to do for 3, 4, 5, 6 months on end, a pen and a whiteboard cut hours off of requirements gathering. So I can imagine that this prototyping process with some of the more modern tools is much more effective.
And again, the tools can be a 3D modeling app. You know, we have that in Windows where you can do a wireframe. It can be PowerPoint showing some web page mock-ups. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate.
Exactly.
It allows you to actually, like I said, get it into the eyes and ears and hands of people so they can play with it. Because when people play with things, they use things in certain ways, and it shows how things might break down outside of what we expected, and also how things may function even better outside we expected.
Yeah, that also works. And then I imagine the other thing that can happen as a result of this is that you get smarter with each sprint. And when I say smarter, I mean your ability to estimate story points, because now you have a cohesive team that's working together and is used to working together. I imagine your estimation gets better and better and better as you move the project along.
Oh yeah, and there's two things that are working for you. Number one, we started with that concept of story points and density instead of units of time. And those are coming together real quickly.
Yep.
There's another part, which is measuring velocity and measuring throughput. You don't have a baseline per se when you first kick off in Agile. What you have is a time box. And that's basically a real rough estimate. But as you gather data, you can gather it quickly. You can actually get quickly to an understanding of how this team and how this work requires time. And we're getting down into the nuts and bolts of number one, how do I manage my progress, status, and forecasting? And number two, how do I use that to effectively communicate with the people? Because we're going to have formal change. We don't throw formal change out of the way, but we have so many more points where we work as a group and talk about issues and opportunities and risk and all of these other things. And as we do this on a regular basis, we capture that and pull it back and we add that to our backlog. And it may be added as an additional feature. It may be added as an impact to multiple features too. And then we go back and we reprioritize the backlog itself.
And then each sprint becomes a more and more refined effort. And typically you would not leave as much behind to go into the backlog. Typically you would be able to estimate better as to what you can actually, if you say, I'm going to do these 13 things in this 2 weeks, as you go along, you get better at getting closer to getting those 13 things done in those 2 weeks.
Right. And the knowledge of how the team goes about doing the work is incredibly valuable, because you're going to have features you haven't started yet, but you've already estimated story points around them, and understanding the duration that you have in the middle of a project with the story points with your forecasting. There may be an opportunity for you to transition to a predictive model.
The other thing that strikes me, because I'm much more user oriented than I am technology oriented, I sort of made that shift in my career, that I became the champion of my customer more than us technicians who want to just kind of put stuff in because it's cool. But I can also see with Agile that if I bring my training staff in earlier, my user acceptance staff in a little earlier, as the functionality is being defined and refined, I get a better product for my training than the old predictive model, where I bring the trainers in near the end, and then they're trying to understand what's been developed, and they're trying to get answers from the design consultants, and those people are busy trying to get the product out. So it becomes a real headache for the trainers and for user acceptance tests near the end of the process. In Agile, I can see them being part of the process, so that you're doing training development and user acceptance tests as you go along with each sprint.
So this is the beautiful thing. And let's talk about acceptance and acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria are the components that we need to accept or sign off pieces of the deliverable or the deliverable, right?
Yeah.
Definition of done in Agile says this is what we have to have in place for functionality. This is what we have to get things out the door and into production. So number one, it does its work and it's beneficial, and it doesn't hurt continuity of the operations. So the mindset is all in the way the words are used. And Agile prefers to use definition of done. Let's talk about functionality instead of talking about getting authorizations. It's funny. And this little concept that I just shared with you is entirely portable over to predictive. If this is something that you can use and you see it as very effective, you're getting functionality to the hands of the people instead of getting requirements. We're not looking at, 30% of our requirements are signed off. We're saying the people can move into their house while we're doing the landscaping.
That totally then fits with getting the user experience in earlier as well as we're building the system. So,
right.
So Tim, we've talked about, when we started this, we talked about the whole idea of project initiation, that wasn't a whole lot different than the predictive experience. You still need to understand kind of your overall objectives and scope. But then we spent a fair amount of time on planning. And then we rolled to execution and kind of control at the same time. We kind of merged those two. We're executing, we're also monitoring and controlling as part of that whole sprint process. In predictive, we have a closure. You implement and you're done. I mean, you're not, obviously go on into maintenance and operations, but from a project perspective, you're done. In Agile, it seems like you're done many times. So what does a closure look like in Agile? I think there's more than one, right?
It's a release. And
Okay.
that's why we talk about definition of done, because each piece of work may have its own release. Like in software, a video game may have an expansion to the world with its initial release. And then it has an addition of 3 battles. And then it has an addition of 2 dungeons. And that's all just one project, right? And what you're looking at is what you might have called in predictive a phase gate.
Yeah.
But it's actually a production release at the end of these features or groups of features. It's just like you said, it's multiple closures. So you're closing all the time. You're gathering lessons learned all the time. You're taking surveys all the time. So it creates more of a consistent flow across the life of the project.
But at the same time, and I'm thinking now for, let's say for an internal organization, I'm thinking that these releases also have to come with a very sharp, strong indication of what's in the next release. Otherwise,
Yes.
you'll continue to have the end users who suddenly get this put onto their desktops. If they continue to get these changes too often, then they'll start getting confused because it seems like their job will be changing every time there's a new release. So I can see that every 2 or 3 weeks would be a little bit too much to dump stuff into production for a specific user group.
Yes. So in World of Warcraft, you get used to these expansions, and the expansion saying we couldn't get this done. It's going to go out in the next. It's going to go in the next release, and we're used to that in the public domain. But inside of corporations, we have to have that pretty locked in. Scope is pretty flexible in Agile, but in business it can't be. And this is where we might want to start off Agile, and then as soon as we can move into a schedule and a budget so that we can actually say, now we can deliver with certainty, with this level of confidence. And you could actually work with this in scaled Agile, where you understand you have a rough order of magnitude, and at a certain expectation, you're going to a definitive estimate, and that may be a milestone event that you want to actually celebrate.
We're all for celebrations, I can tell you that. I guess the other way of approaching what I just kind of the thing that I just threw out at you, I guess the other way of approaching that for your internal user group is to look at internal user groups. So whereas the development team can continue to put out new releases every month or so, if they hit different user groups, then to those people, it's every 3 or 4 months. And so therefore, it doesn't seem like it's hitting them quite as often with changes in their job descriptions or changes in what it is that they do on a daily basis. So I can see where a good strategic project manager working with his or her primary stakeholder on the customer side could really take advantage of Agile and just keep things flowing and just keep the organization benefiting as a result of this.
Yes, and to top that off, one of the other requirements of Agile, well, it's one of the requirements I've been talking about all along, which is it's all about the relationship. It's all about the planning, predicting, and it's all about the relationship. If you can establish with the stakeholders, it's not us and you, it's we. And if you can have the stakeholders voting and committing on having a reasonable, flexible schedule and a reasonably flexible budget until we hit this point, then they can say, okay, it's our decisions that's driving this. It shows accountability where the accountability is not just on the team to deliver, but the stakeholders to support, which is one of the hallmarks of we hope Agile.
Well, and we're giving that stakeholder and the project manager time. I think you mentioned before, for the project manager, time to think and strategize, but also for the for the stakeholder, in our case, the owner of the swimsuit store, time to envision different things that can happen. And so if I take this model, if I take the next step, I'm so pleased as the owner of the swimsuit store with what's happening, and I'm seeing my profits increase. I decide that I'm going to establish a different division for, say, pool toys or umbrellas, beach umbrellas and beach chairs, or that sort of thing. So now I can begin to expand and use my continuous improvement or continuous development process to expand my business.
And you can also be brainstorming with the project manager or the team, and where the team said, it would take us 4 to 6 extra weeks to port this website over to a smartphone app. And wouldn't it be neat if people were at a swimming pool and saw things and they could go onto this website? This is the interesting thing. The ability to innovate is an opportunity that we don't often express in a predictive environment.
Well, in predictive, it becomes such a focus to get the job done that a lot of times the only way you can envision something new is if you get a piece of legislation thrust upon you, or the CEO comes and says, I need to make this change or something, because you're so focused on developing and delivering that piece of work that you scoped and put definition and requirements around, that you just don't have time to envision. Whereas this, what you've just described for us and our listeners, just allows me to say, oh, let me try this, let me add that. I like the whole smartphone thing. That would be another extrapolation of what we're doing without a whole lot of extra effort.
Right. And again, it's a little more natural in how people work. And that's the beautiful thing about Agile. It doesn't fight the normal behavior of human beings, as long as you take a few things into account. It actually works a little smoother. You do have to coach and mentor people in certain things. They have to stand up, and they have to, be ready to manage conflict and be a little bit more confrontational, be able to support their needs and expectations. But if you set that expectation, give people the tools they need to be able to debate instead of argue, this is where things get really interesting in Agile.
Yeah. Well, and the other side, coming from an IT perspective, it also gives you the opportunity, as you watch your subject matter experts from your customer side perhaps debate amongst themselves, you can offer things from your experience as an IT person that would bolster what it is that they're asking. So it becomes truly collaborative, where you as the IT person become part of their solution as well, because you're coaching technically.
Exactly. Very good. This is fun. And this was a good capstone discussion. I think we've treated Agile really well in these 3 meetings. Is there any more questions or comments you have on Agile, or does this fill things out for you?
No, it fills things out. I would not, and I think you said it already, this is not the time to throw predictive out. I think predictive still has a very strong place in the industry. I think Agile has, as we've discussed, a very strong place in the industry. There's probably a place for a hybrid approach with the Agile and the predictive being part of a single project. So this is actually enlightening and worth experimenting with.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're starting to see articles and presentations and webinars out discussing different variations of hybrid and how they may be used. So people are already starting to experiment, which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like anything you do. I think you mentioned also, it fits with human nature, and I can tell you, I've just just example that hit me right now. I've remodeled 3 or 4 different homes as we've moved along in our life, and each time I got better at it because I learned from what I did with the previous home, and I put in some ideas that got us to our objective quicker. And it just, the whole idea being is that human nature and human the ability for the human I'm struggling with my words here, but the ability for us as humans to be able to learn from our past experience and apply them to our new experience and make it better just fits so well with Agile. Or maybe I should say Agile fits with human nature.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly. And since you're not working with a plan, you're working with the unknown. Those are the knowns, the way people behave, act, and interact in order to figure out what's going on and how to put things together to be not just surviving, but thriving.
Man, this has been a great discussion.
Good.
I can't wait for our next one. I know it won't probably be on Agile, but we just keep exploring new processes for our project managers. And I think if project managers have additional questions for you or for myself, where would they ask you questions, Tim?
Go over to LinkedIn. That's where I am right now, or you can leave a comment with this and other shows, and we'll get back to you on those. Or you can always attend our shows. But primarily for me directly, you can contact me through LinkedIn.
Yeah, so Tim Jerome or Timothy Jerome on LinkedIn?
Timothy or Tim gets to me. Timothy
Yes.
is what I'm formally.
Good. And I also can be found on LinkedIn as Merv Jursak, and I also have a website, peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com. So we welcome your comments, we welcome your questions, and we welcome your knowledge shared with us as well. Until next time, Tim.
Indeed. Thanks again, Merv, and thanks everyone for watching.